Good morning, everyone. To see a lot of early joiners today. I'll just wait a couple more minutes before we formally start. It's just a minute before the start time and allow everybody to join. So we'll kick off in a minute or two. All right, I might as well kick it off just a little bit after the hour. So got a little bit of administration, then we kick in the presentations. So good morning, everybody. My name is Martin Matica. I'm one of the group managers in WA, Market Development and Energy Procurement. I'm chairing the meeting today. For those who haven't met me, I've been around in AEMO for some time now, and been holding a couple of different roles, and it's my pleasure to chair today's WAECF. As we kick it off, we acknowledge the traditional owners of the country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay respect to elders past and present. So look, just a bit of housekeeping. Just mute your microphones during the presentation so we don't get any sort of background noise. You can leave your camera off. Sometimes it gets a bit sort of overwhelming for the networks to manage that. But look, if you've got a question, put your hand up in chat, ask a question as well. We'll keep an eye on that. And if you don't want to ask any questions during it, then certainly after the WAECF, you're quite welcome to reach out and have a chat to us on anything that we cover today. So, so first, a couple of things. We issued out the minutes for the last WAECF. That was actually last year. It was a couple of months ago now. We haven't received any comments on that. Unless anybody's got any particular points in the minutes, we'll take them as accepted. And also, we also issued out a couple of tweaks to the terms of reference of this session as well. I don't think we received any feedback on that, so we'll also take that as being okay. But if you've got any issues, quite happy if you put your hand up or shoot us a message if you'd like us to discuss either of those points. Okay, so I'll leave that there. So okay, we'll move straight on. So so quite a full agenda today. So we've got a number of updates. We've got on the power system. We have also Kate Ryan's going to give us an update on the allowable revenue submission, or the empiric allowable revenue submission we're going to be putting forward soon. Nitika Kapani is giving us an update on the capacity market investment. And then there's some time from QA and other business. We had a couple of questions come in prior to the WAECF, and we will try and answer them through the presentation. But if not, we can certainly ask them then. So with that, I'd like to hand over the presentation to Paul Elliott and Nicholas Nelson, please. Paul, you bring up the presentation to start with.
Yep, that's right. So thanks, Martin. I'll see if I can get my technology to work, which is always a bit of a challenge. There we go. I think I'm there. So welcome everyone. My name's Paul Elliott. So I'm the Manager of Power System Operations in Real-Time Ops. So I manage the control room. So it's been a really interesting summer. And I'll take you through some of the challenges that we've got there. So first of all, we're looking at record setting this summer. So it's been a very, very big summer for us this year. So you can see that there's a more than a 7-year gap between records. and then starting in November, but really through the summer, through end of January and February, we've really smashed the records significantly above the previous record. So we'll go through that, the drivers behind that in a couple of slides, but it's really huge. So at 4,233, and that's operational demand, which was just before 6 in February, and that was a Sunday, which is really unusual. And through this period that we've declared lack of reserve conditions through a number of days. So the records at the time, so the first big heat wave that we've had was on the 31st and 1st of Feb. And as you can see, 4,067 and 4,169 were historical peaks on their day, though of course been relegated to 6th and 4th. So interesting in terms of the drivers there, the heat wave being multiple days in excess of 40 degrees, with the maximum of the 42.6 on the 1st of February. So it was really hot. We declared the LOR2 for both those days, and under the LOR2, we also dispatched, or we activated the DSP, the demand side programs, and the supplementary reserve capacity. And across the peak, we certainly needed to burn a lot of liquid dispatched over the time. So they were records at the time, which were huge compared to the previous ones. Of course, that walks through to the 18th to the 20th, where we had again record consecutive days, and this was actually a really interesting period, and huge loads there. Amazingly, the 4,233 on a Sunday, and of course our expectation would be, if that happened on a business day, that would have been much higher. To do that, that came about by the heat wave, so 40+ degrees consecutively, but a really big driver was the extreme overnight temperatures, which for the one evening was about 27 degrees, which is absolutely huge. We also not only declared the LOR2 on the Sunday and the Tuesday, we actually declared an LOR3, a forecast LOR3, saying that we may need to request Western Power to reduce load because we didn't have forecast that we would not have sufficient generation to meet the demand. We dispatched the DSP and SRC, so with reductions of about 235 megawatts in the market, which means that we would have been significantly higher. We'll also see from this that the underlying demand exceeded 5 gigawatts. So if we actually had that without the rooftop PV, then it would be a real struggle to manage that with the utility scale generation that we have connected at the moment. What's driving this really high underlying demand? Well, population growth off the back of COVID, really strong economic conditions. Of course, the expectation that people are purchasing larger and more AC, and also the move, and a slow move towards the electrification really is driving that those high loads. And our ESU will actually describes some of those drivers quite well. The forecast record was near the current ESU, but significantly behind ones that have been previously published. So what drove these conditions? So on the left, you can see the daily temperatures for the different days, and on the right, the operational demand comparison. Really key one to see is the red one, which was on the 19th, and that was when we declared a forecast LOR3 condition. And one of the big drivers for that, as you can see, the really huge ramp up in the morning, which was certainly well in excess of what we had through the other days that we were tracking. And so with those forecasts, we really were concerned that we were going to get there, and certainly we didn't make that call lightly, but we were definitely were extremely concerned that we were going to get into a position where we'd need to reduce the load on the system to ensure that the power system remains secure and whole. So these are different things that we track throughout the day to make calls on where we are. So things that added. So we're looking here at the temperature forecasts that we have, and this really highlights how heat banking actually comes in. So what we're looking at here is the various models with a percentage of certainty in those models across, and then in the black you've got the actual temperatures that were on the day. So we can see the overnight temp 18th to 19th was about minimum of about 27 degrees, which is really, really, really high. Though interestingly, around about what we're forecasting in there. Rolling through into the next day, at peak, we had that 35 degrees at 6 p.m., which was well in excess of what we were forecasting in that bank, and it really actually shows that contributing that heat that stays in the house. We all know that when it's really hot overnight, you get up in the morning and really need to maximize the air conditioning to reduce that down. So it really actually drives up that demand. So that high temperatures overnight plus the high temperatures at peak really, really, really drove that demand. Of course, when we have the lower temperatures overnight, you get the cooling effect, and we actually don't get that heat banking within your house. So you know yourselves that after a couple of days of 40 degrees, it really, really gets stifling within your home. The other thing that we take into account during in making LOR declarations is the semi-scheduled facilities. So we get forecasts for these. We get a number of different forecasts, and we actually need to use those to make calls on when we need to activate whether the DSPs or the SRC or take other mitigations in place. So whilst the forecasts are generally reasonably well, we need to be quite conservative with these. So you can see from this slide here, so we've got the forecast is quite high and coming off quite rapidly towards peak, whereas the actuals that we had on the day is that the wind dropped off quite significantly during the mid-afternoon, came up a bit and then continued to drive down across the peak. So with that uncertainty within the semi-scheduled facilities, it makes our life really difficult in terms of making those assessments, and so we're actually quite conservative on those. And that's one of the reasons that sometimes you'll see the occasions where we've made an LOR declaration and the semi-scheduled facilities output may stay higher than we've forecast, and then we actually move through quite comfortably. But of course, to ensure that we guarantee the security and reliability of the system, we need to be conservative in those estimates of what forecasting in the semi-schedule is going to be. What do we actually do in making those assessments? First of all, under the rules, of course, we need to dispatch all available market generation. Once we've done that, and with our forecast that we're still inside our reserve margins, we'll actually activate the DSP and the supplementary reserve capacity, which does actually include some DSOC uplift. So we get some additional output from some generators that under normal conditions we might not. Interestingly, of course, these have timeframes that we need to activate on. So we'll need to make some calls earlier in the day. So our first real assessment in terms of activation occurs in the order of between 10 and 11 in the morning, so that we can actually get the maximum output from our DSPs and SRCs through the peak period. So we're actually looking at that on forecasts. Then once we get to an emergency operating, or once we get closer, we can declare an emergency operating state if we need to, and that's to activate generation that doesn't have capacity credits, and we are in an emergency operating state for that. And we do that because without the emergency operating, or to get into the emergency operating state, we need to use that as the trigger. But without activating those, then we'll be extremely close to that LOR3 mark that we need. So we activate those to stave that off. Then if we're still getting really close and we get below our reserve margins, and we go to a point where a significant contingency will actually trigger under frequency load shedding. When we're in that space, we'll actually potentially, or we can direct Western Power to reduce the load on the Swiss to ensure that we have some security within the system. We have not had to do this this summer, and touch wood, we don't need to moving forward, but it's something that we actually have in our plans to ensure that the broader Swiss is reliable and have some security there. So that's broadly what we're talking about, that really hot summer that we've had so far, and hopefully we're not walking through. Is there any questions in the chat there, Martin?
Yeah, there is. I think you've got a record number of questions, actually. So I'll start at the top and we'll see how we go. Okay, so from Noel, do you know how much demand was missing due to network outages at the time of these peaks?
No, we didn't have any significant outages in the transmission network. There may have been a small number of outages on the distribution network, but we don't have the ability to detect that at the moment. So we can't say for certain the impact that that has had, but not anything material that I'm aware of.
Okay. So we've got a question from Oscar. Any thoughts on what the demand could have been under those conditions on Sunday the 18th, if that occurred on a business day?
We're not 100% sure, but certainly gut feel would be that it's in the order of 4,400, if not higher. Though, of course, that it's hard to quantify because we don't know what participants are taking IRCR actions at the time, and other mitigations that we might be unaware of in the market side. But of course, if you look at that, and with the DSP and SRC that we took on other days, which is about 230 megawatts. So you can certainly, if you add that on, we're looking at 4,400, 4,500, but it's difficult to quantify because of the variables that we don't know about underneath.
Okay. All right, I've got a question from Aidan Barker. Have there been any estimates of how much system load opposed to underlying load is being met by DPV exports?
It's hard to say, but as we showed in there, that the total underlying demand suggested that it would be in the order of about 5 gigawatts. It's difficult to say because the peak in terms of the load occurs once the DPV is really coming off. So somewhere between the peak of the 4,200 and to the 5 gigawatts, somewhere in that space, but it's difficult to quantify exactly how much that rooftop PV is offsetting.
All right, the questions keep on going, Paul. Okay, Oscar asked the question: is the heat making effect reflected into ESU forecast models? Which might not be a question for you, might be one for Toby Price if he's online. Otherwise, we can take that one on notice. From what I recall, there would be the multiple heat days do get factored into the forecast, as well as quite a number of other weather factors. And there's a number of scenarios that go through it. So I think that's a yes. Wayne Trumbull's asked a question: how do wind forecasts track generally over time? So maybe we can just narrow that down just over those peak intervals. How did the wind forecast go?
Well, the variable is probably the easiest way to say. We had a number of those days that were very close to forecast, which made us more or comfortable enough with the reserves over the day. We had a couple where the wind stayed high and didn't come off as quickly, but there was definitely a number that were significantly lower than we'd forecast, and very close to the lowest conservative estimate that we had. So on balance, I'd say that there was a reasonably close to what we were forecasting, what we were expecting. Though we need to be much more conservative in that, because it wouldn't go down well that the forecast was off by half an hour, and you can see with those really sharp drops, a half an hour would make a really big difference, and so that's why we're quite conservative.
Yep, great. Wayne's asked another question associated with the processes that we took to manage the high demand, which was how often did we end up calling on industrial load to help us through those peak periods?
So I believe that we activated the SRC and DSP. I think it was 12 days that we've had since the hot period has started. So maybe 1 or 2 days closer, but it's certainly in that order.
Okay. And one sort of a more sort of related question is how often has DSP and SRC been caught over this summer?
So that's it. That's the mechanism that we use to activate those industrials, is through the SRC and DSP.
Paul, I've just had a check. It's 13 days for SRC, so okay. Very close.
Thanks, Nicholas. Yeah, obviously I've forgotten one.
It's okay. That's okay. Excellent. Look, great questions there. Thanks very much. Hey, just before we let Paul get on to the other very busy operational activity that occurred in the last period, is look, it was a lot of people pulled together to help us manage the high demand periods. There was a lot of coordination and a lot of heightened awareness, and we appreciate all the actions that people undertook to help us meet the peak demand period over the summer. Okay, you've got the next bit again, Paul, so I'll let you run with the Eastern Goldfields.
Excellent. Thanks. That was what the hot weather was doing, and now we're looking at the impacts that we've had that created the islanding in the Eastern Goldfields. So we may remember, it was a long time ago now, and that on the 16th of Feb, the Tuesday, it was January. On the Tuesday, that we had significant thunderstorms rolling through the eastern metropolitan area and into the goldfields, and you can see from these pictures that we had the temperature dropped off significantly, very, very quickly, with huge amounts of thunderstorms and heavy weather rolling through, and of course the thunderstorm severe weather warning was issued early afternoon. Of course, that impacted with many thousands of lightning strikes, particularly through the hills, and then out towards Merredin and Southern Cross. And Noel, this is the changes in operational demand here is a combination of both the weather, so the underlying load not needing to work as hard, but also a significant impacts from the distribution customers that were had their power out due to the various weather conditions there. So it certainly had an impact on the 16th. Now, if the 16th wasn't fun enough, on the 17th we had the thunderstorms too, and this caused 5 of the 220 kV towers of Western Power's lines to come down. So if you've ever seen one of these towers up close, you know they're massive and they're really, really well built. So having the weather come and fold them up like that is just absolutely astounding. Of course, the Goldfields is connected by that single 220 kV line, and losing these towers meant that they tripped the Eastern Goldfields off. The West Cal backup generators were started under the NCAS contract arrangement that Western Power has with Synergy, and they tripped a short time later and were unable to be restarted until the following afternoon due to various issues there. And Western Power worked with Synergy, AEMO, and other participants and all residential customers were reconnected to supply after about 33 hours, which is a significant amount of time, but the amount of time and effort and work that went in to get there was astounding. So Western Power worked to restore the 220 kV, and AEMO operated the Eastern Goldfields Island to meet the load and manage the frequency, dispatching the Westcal gas turbine 2 for ISOC for frequency control, Westcal GT3, Parkeston Power Station to manage variations in the load. So collectively, that managed it as much as we could. Western Power also managed the network loading to maintain the customer reliability, and they worked flat out 24/7 to build the new structures, as you can see here, and the 220 kV line was re-energized on the 27th of January, and then AEMO proceeded to bring down the Westcal GTs and actually move the power system back to its normal operation with the Eastern Goldfields connected to the Swiss. So that's a very, very quick one in terms of what happened there. It was a great challenge by everyone, both on the network side, but also in terms of the operational side. Great support from Western Power, Synergy and Parkeston to ensure that the customers got back connected and that load was maintained through there. And that is me finished. Is there any questions on those ones, Martin?
There's no questions on that one, but there's a late grab for the previous presentation if you're after to try to answer that one. So,
of course.
look, yeah, okay. So there was the Wayne asked the question: what did the LOR2 state of emergency events experienced so far this summer still have been the case? The reserve capacity requirement remained at 300 megawatts versus 900 megawatts outlined in the 2023 ESU.
That's a very good question.
Yeah, so we can take that one on notice. That's fine if that's okay, or if
might jump in, Martin, if that's all right, because we
okay, no
we did thinking. So there's probably a couple of things in terms of just the difference between the ESU study and LOR condition declarations, which sort of Paul's touched on. So the forecast LOR conditions are determined using both the ST parser and closer to real-time or day of event power system security and reliability studies. So the LOR studies use the demand forecasts expected on the day and actually consider like the actual available generation online in terms of scheduled generation, but also intermittent generation forecasts to actually make that LOR declaration prior to the peak occurring. So Paul mentioned before and used the example of the 19th when AEMO was forecasting LOR3 conditions. In terms of the conservative approach AEMO need to take to intermittent forecasts, where sometimes those intermittent forecasts don't actually materialize in real time, and there can be differences in terms of the wind dropping off earlier than expected. That contrasts to the ESU, where it forecasts the conditions and events 2 years ahead of time to determine the reserve capacity requirement. So as I sort of said, the last few LOR conditions occurred because there was actually insufficient generation either available or being forecast through using the intermittent forecasts, or available via the NCAS and or the SRC mechanisms, and that's what sort of triggers the LOR declarations. Now, obviously, Wayne, to the point of the ESU, like if we forecast a higher requirement in the ESU, that may have mitigated the real time situation, but that depends on power system conditions on the day. So sort of two different concepts connected, but determined using different inputs.
Rick, can I just build on that, because I think the other kind of key difference between the long-term planning and the more operational planning is that the planning criterion is different to the reserve margin that we use operationally. So in sort of real-time operations, we're effectively planning to cover the largest two contingencies on the system at that time, plus have enough regulation service available. So it's kind of an N-2 sort of framework. And so that's set dynamically, actually, as Rick was saying, based on what the actual kit on the system is and what's generating at what level at the time. So it's set dynamically in real time to that kind of N-2-ish methodology, which is different to the methodology for the planning criterion in the ESU.
Is that a change, Kate, from the N-1, the largest unit on the system that we used to use?
No, in operational timeframes, we've been working on N-2, I think, for as long as the Swiss has been around and probably well before. So there's always been a difference between the long-term planning approach in the ESU and the sort of operational requirements that we've got to maintain a secure system in real time.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Wayne. It's a good question because it's a bit complex.
Like almost every aspect of our market. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Kate, and thanks, Rick. All right. It doesn't look like there's any more questions from Paul, so thank you very much for the those overview of those two challenging operational events. And now I'll pass over to Nicholas to give us an update on settlements outcomes.
Thanks, Martin. I trust you can hear me and see my screen. Very good. All right. Hello, everyone. For anyone who hasn't met me before, my name is Nicholas. I'm the manager of the WA Prudentials and Settlements team here at AEMO. And what I want to share with you today is basically just a very high-level overview of some of the costs that we've seen in the new market so far, and a bit of a comparison with the costs of the old market. And for anyone who came along to the AEMO event a few weeks ago, these slides might look familiar to you because they are essentially the same as what we presented there. Before I jump into it, I do want to caution on a couple of points before, sort of don't jump to conclusions. We're still only working with a few months of data, and those months of data are, while they cover a period where everyone is still very fresh with the new market, and they also cover a pretty extreme summer where, as Paul mentioned, we've set our top 8 highest ever demand forecasts or demand records ever. So it's just worth treating these results with a little bit of caution and keeping that in mind as we look at them. So jumping in and starting with a bit of an overview of the different segments of the market. I think the real trends that you can see in terms of comparing the old market and the new market, or the really interesting ones, the first one to look at really is energy. And what we can see here is, despite having this sort of very, very high, very hot summer with, as I mentioned, the 8 highest demand intervals ever, the overall cost of the real-time energy market, similar to what we used to call the balancing market, really hasn't changed very much. It's gone up a little bit, but that's sort of in line with what you would expect with such a hot summer. So that's quite a good outcome. The two areas that we see a big increase are in the ESS segment and in the uplift segment. Now, uplift covers both energy uplift and FCAS uplift, and in both cases, those relate to costs that are paid to facilities which are required to come on at a higher price than what they offered into the market, either to help manage network congestion or to help provide FCAS services in order to ensure that we maintain a secure and reliable system. So that's what those are. We've grouped them together here, but it's worth knowing that out of those two, the vast majority of these costs are actually FCAS uplift costs rather than energy uplift costs. So what's driving some of these increases? Well, the big difference really is that we have moved from, especially for contingency raise and contingency lower, which are equivalent to the old spinning reserve ancillary service and the old load rejection reserve. We've moved from an administered pricing mechanism to a true competitive market where participants submit their own prices, their own costs. And so what we have seen is that the new costs really are reflective of what is being offered into the market, and therefore there should be this should be more transparent, or more reflective of true costs. In terms of the FCAS uplift, it's worth noting here that we have implemented a fix into WEMD recently. We had a bug in our system that was resulting in an overcalculation of these costs. So we do expect the FCAS uplift costs to come down a little bit. Having said that, they will still remain sort of reasonably high compared to constrained compensation uplift in the previous market. So that is something that we are looking into to try and understand what is driving these high uplift costs. I can see a question has dropped into the chat, so I'll just address that now. So the question is that the last QED identified a $40 million increase in the cost of essential system services compared to LFAS, well, general ancillary services in Q3. So who provided these ESS services and which providers collected the $40 million increase? Thank you for your question. I do acknowledge this is one that was sent to us a couple of days ago, so it's a question on notice. We haven't pulled together those details simply because this information is already publicly available, and we simply, unfortunately, don't have the resources to pull together every piece of analysis that we would like to. So if you are interested in having a look at that in more detail, please jump onto our WEM market data website. If you have a look at the FCAS accreditation subpage, you can see exactly which facilities are accredited to provide FCAS services. If you have a look at the dispatch solution files, you can see all the information you need around the prices of the market services, which facilities were enabled for those market services, how much each facility was enabled for, and so on and so forth. And you can also see the total FCAS uplift payments which have been made under that subpage. We are required to publish those costs under the WEM rules, so those are made available through the WEM through our market data website. Having said that, as I said, we do expect those ones, the FCAS uplift prices or costs, to come down a little bit over the next few months as we go through our adjustments and as that bug is taken out of the next adjustments. Yes, Wayne, transparent reporting is our job. That is that's why we make this information.
Well, why are you turning me into Sherlock Holmes? You just went through a 5-minute explanation of where I need to go to find this information.
Yes, and that information is publicly available for everyone to have a look at.
So why aren't you providing it?
We have provided it. It is publicly available, Wayne.
Yeah, I can collect it from 4 or 5 different databases, and then I need to figure it out?
Yes, and like I said, we would love to be able to provide, do all the analysis, all of these kinds of things, but we simply don't have the resource to pull together that information. So where data is publicly available, we generally direct market participants towards that. We're happy to point you to where the information is so that you can collate it yourself. But like I said, we simply don't have the resources to provide all of that, to do all of that work for everyone. Okay. I will continue on. I can see a few more questions in the chat, but I'll just finish with move on for a bit and then we'll come back to them. So diving into the real-time energy price, formerly the balancing price, in a little bit more detail, what we can see here really reflects what I was talking about earlier, that although we have seen maybe a slight increase in prices compared to the equivalent months last year, the hot season last year, that's sort of to be expected given the incredibly hot season that we have had. So you can see here that we've set, this is the yellow columns here are the maximum demands throughout those months. You can see that we've set, as we mentioned, we've set records in each of these months. And that's reflected in the energy price, which is a little higher than it was back then, but overall comparable and sort of following the pattern that you would expect. This peak here in winter is reflective of slightly unseasonably high temperatures in June, I believe, which coincided unfortunately with high outages as well. So that resulted in sort of a little bit of an outlier month or a couple of outlier months there around that period. And finally, sort of pulling all this together, we have summarized these costs in sort of a per megawatt hour basis to the entire market. I do acknowledge that these per megawatt hour costs are not going to be the same for every single participant, because different participants are going to be more or less exposed to different market services, different segments than compared to other market participants, depending on what kind of participant they are. Are they a retailer? Are they a generator? Are they a gentailer? But this gives a sense of what the overall cost of the market is for a bit of a comparison as well with the previous market. So we can see that comparing just the hot season with the previous year, the last year of the previous market. So again, there's a bit of seasonality there, which makes this not a perfectly fair comparison, but we are working to continue to provide more of these analyses through WAECF's QEDs and so on. But we can see that the real-time energy market is a little bit, the real-time energy average price is a little bit lower than what it was in the previous year, but fairly similar. Regulation raise and regulation lower have come up a fair bit, but we've actually looked into this at a longer term, into the longer term trends. And I believe we reported on this in our last QED. And what we can actually see when we do that is that although the regulation prices are a bit higher, or costs are a bit higher than what they were in the last year before reform, if you go back a year or two before that, it's actually quite comparable to where they were before that. So what we had actually seen was quite low prices in the LFAS markets in the last year there. Contingency raise and contingency lower, as I've already mentioned, those are two of the big increases. We've moved away from this administered pricing into this into a fully competitive market for these services, and that increase in price is basically an outworking of that, where we are seeing participants bid in according to their actual costs, and so on and so forth. There's a few additional things to look into that. I believe that we are procuring a little bit more contingency raise, and that's sort of being driven by the fact that we are now doing a live co-optimization essentially. So we are, balancing the size of the contingency, the amount of contingency raise that we need, and the costs in that market against each other costs in other markets. So that is a little driver and something that we're looking into understanding better. But again, the big thing here is really that it's just a complete change in how these services are costed or are priced, and that's really driven it here. Rock-off is a new market, relatively low costs. SRS, system restart service, has not changed too much. Uplift, as I mentioned, is another big one, mainly driven by FCAS uplift costs. We do expect this to come down by a few dollars over the next few months, I think up until the end of July, when we, as we move through the adjustments and apply the correct FCAS uplift payments in the adjustments. But even with that, it still remains a little bit high, especially when compared to constrained compensation in the previous market. And again, that is something that we are investigating, trying to understand and make sure that everything is functioning correctly as it should be. That is it from me. I'm happy to go through some of the questions in the chat now, and I will just go up, see where I left off. So one question, do these costs include costs associated with SRC or NCAS? No, as yet, everything that I've presented here doesn't include NCAS or SRC costs. With SRC in particular, our plan is to do some reporting on that in the next QED, which we expect to come out, I think, around in the middle of April. So keep an eye open for that. Next question, does the 2 or 3 times increase in ESS costs indicate that previously ESS was loss-making, or does it suggest there is a profit component in the new prices? I'm not able to say. Those are possibilities, but at this stage, I'm not able to say what the core driver for it is. However, like I said, it is something that we are looking into and trying to understand. Moving down, would the market participants be refunded the incorrect FCAS amount already paid? Yes. So as we move through our adjustments and the FCAS uplift payments are reduced, those payments will be returned to the market participants who paid those uplift payments via those same adjustment mechanisms. So through the adjustment 1 or the adjustment 2 invoices. The next one is price information of essential services available on AEMO's website. It seems to me only payments provided, but not the price. Yes, the the price is definitely on there. Like I said, if you have a look in the dispatch solution files, they are included in there for every single interval. They may also be stored elsewhere. I'm not quite sure, but certainly if you go and have a look at the dispatch solution files, that is correct. Next one. From Jeff, how does the new WEM ESS costs compare to NEM ESS costs? Great question. Something I would love to have a look at, but something that I haven't had quite had the time to go into yet. But yeah, fantastic question. Something that I would love to look at. Keep going through. Would you have a new versus old comparison for the same period or months? Yeah, we don't have one available right now. Like I said, we have limited resources to do this sort of stuff. So this is what we've put together so far. We can definitely, we might look at being able to provide something a little bit more comparing a specific season with a previous season in the future, for example, in the WAECF or some in a future WACF or QED. That's all the questions I can see. So unless there's anything else, I will pass back. Oh, I've seen a couple more come in. I'll just address those, Martin.
Yeah, no problems at all.
So first one, thanks, Wayne. So the question is, assuming that all the listed NCAS contracts meet their conditions precedent by October 1, 2024, what do we expect the cost per megawatt to be when recovered from the market during the year to 30 September 2025? Thank you. So we've had a look at this one. The total availability cost that we expect for the 2022 NCAS for reliability for peak demand service in the 2024-25 capacity year is $144 million. That is the same for the next capacity year, 2025-26. This is for about 613 megawatts of NCAS capacity, and this averages out to about $234,000 per megawatt per year. Being paid for the capacity being made available. That's a little higher than the 24-25 reserve capacity price for new facilities, which is around $194,000 per megawatt per year, and it's a little lower than the 25-26 price, which is $251,000 per megawatt per year. This doesn't include any activation payments because we're not in a position to forecast with sort of any reliable accuracy exactly how much of the service will be activated. So that does cover availability costs only. I will note as well that the contracts do include some obligations to register as facilities and to apply for capacity credits. And if these facilities do receive capacity credits, the payments that they receive for the capacity credits will be offset from the contractual payments for the NCAS, and that's in accordance with the WEM rules as well. Now, what we haven't done is try to convert this number into a per megawatt hour basis. The reason for that, as I kind of mentioned earlier, is that the per megawatt hour cost is going to work out very differently for different market participants, and also because it's very difficult to make an accurate forecast of exactly how many megawatt hours are going to be consumed in the 24, 25 and 25, 26 capacity years. So what we want to do is just provide that $144 million per year overall cost, and market participants can kind of do their own working to see what they expect that to work out for them in terms of a per megawatt hour basis. So hopefully that answers that question. And then the last one I can see is what percentage of uplift and ESS costs in the new market are attributed to large scale renewable assets? Okay, so I assume you mean what costs are being charged to them. I don't have a percentage amount off the top of my head. What I can say is that regulation raise, regulation lower are assigned to, I believe, semi-scheduled facilities in roughly in proportion with their generation, and contingency raise and some rock-off costs are attributed to all generators in proportion with their generation, but with proportionally higher costs to bigger generators. Some requests on uplift costs, splitting them out. Yep, good feedback. We'll take that on board. Thanks, Jake. And can we provide those NCAS costs to us in writing rather than just this verbal update? I'll Yeah, we'll get back to you on that one, figure out what the most appropriate way to publish that is. Certainly the prices are already published on our website, but I acknowledge that it may not be possible to work out the annual costs just from prices. Okay, I will leave it at that, Martin, and hand back to you. And I'll still be around later.
Yeah, you did very well. There's quite a lot of quite detailed questions there.
My pleasure.
Look, there's also a couple of questions about access to the slides. So yes, we do provide these. So I know that's come up a few times, so everybody can get a copy of the slides after the WAECF today. Yes, and with some of those questions, we'll take that away. I mean, they're interesting questions in relation to how to cut the data. Quite a lot of detail there. Once again, some of these might be easy if you send them into advance, so we can actually have them prepared to talk to about, or maybe get back to you separately. But anyway, that is fine. So thank you for the operational update. Now I pass over to Kate Ryan, who's our Executive General Manager for WA Functions and AEMO Strategy, and she's going to talk about our second in-period submission update. So over to yourself, Kate.
Thanks very much, Martin. And I'm sort of feeling like we maybe put these in the wrong order because I probably got the dry bit at the end after some really interesting and engaging presentations on what's been going on in our market over the summer, and indeed costing in our new market, which are clearly of great interest. But I do need to give you an update because let me see if I've got this working. I didn't just press that twice. We are preparing to make another in-period submission to the ERA for our capital expenditure and operating expenditure. I've got a few very dense slides to work through because I did want to make sure I'd actually written it on the slide and didn't just speak to some of this stuff. But really just a heads up that we're about to make that submission. We'll make it to the ERA in March to enable a decision before the start of the next financial year. And really what's underpinning the need for us to go back for a further in-period submission is really the pace of change in the sector. As we all know, the energy reforms that are going on are continuing at pace. And some of those reforms, while they were certainly earmarked when we started our AR6 period and started preparing for that back in 2021, they've obviously taken a lot more shape since then. So we're better able to estimate the cost of implementing those. And some of those require implementation in pretty short timelines. But of course, there's other drivers as well, and I will touch on some of these in a little bit more detail. I think while we don't like having to go back and ask for more money, and I know participants certainly don't want to pay any more in their fees, what we're finding is that the situation that we're in with the pace of change is essentially the same challenge faced by system operators around the world. We've done a little bit of peer comparisons for the AEMO business as a whole, but it obviously translates to the segment that is WA. And really finding that the sort of price pressure and cost pressure that we're under is being mirrored in those market and system operators, and where we are doesn't appear to be kind of out of step with that around the world. Bearing in mind that every market is going through its transition in its own pace, and Australia, of course, is going through pretty rapidly. So we're obviously investing in our systems as part of this for reform and to operate the market and to plan, but we're also trying to really organise ourselves well to optimise for this future and draw as much as we can on the benefits of being part of the broader AEMO business. There we go. So just a bit of a timeline, because you guys don't all live and breathe allowable revenue processes like we do. The allowable revenue 6 period relates to the 3-year period from 1 July 22 to the end of financial year, ending 30 June 2024. But of course, the process of preparing for and seeking approval for our allowable revenue and CapEx actually starts quite well before that. And we were preparing for our AR6 submission, the original one, in 2021, and we submitted it in late 2021. I think one of the first things I've reflected on as we've been putting this together is that a lot has changed since we put that submission together in 2021. And I'll talk about reforms later, but I mean, if you just think about the external environment that we've all been operating in, and AEMO's facing like a lot of the same challenges I know your businesses are. But obviously we were still in COVID restriction period in 2021. We were in a very low interest rate, low low wage growth and low inflation environment, and that's clearly changed quite significantly since then. Back in 2021, when we were preparing our submission, neither the WA government nor the Commonwealth government had yet formally committed to net zero, with those happening sort of in late 21 and early 22. And so sort of the decarbonisation momentum hadn't really become evident at that point either. So a few of those kind of external factors that really have changed quite significantly over the last few years. And of course, reform is continuing at pace, and that's a bit of a theme of our request. So this sort of is a sticker price shock. There are some large figures in here, and we do acknowledge that. What this slide shows really is the sort of 4 cost adjustment areas, drivers or categories, the ways that we've grouped them up to try and explain what's driving them. I will talk to a couple of these in a bit more detail now, but just to sort of step through what I think are the simpler ones, and then I'll spend a fair bit of time on the new reform and energy transformation activities, which is where the bulk of the additional cost clearly is. The first category is actually a flow-on impact from our first in-period submission. So I'm sure you all recall that we went back to the ERA to seek an in-period adjustment of our capital expenditure and able to deliver the WEM reform program to hit that 1 October 2023 go live milestone. That was obviously approved. What that was, though, was just a CapEx submission. And of course, the way that we ultimately recover that capital expenditure is through depreciation and amortisation over time. So what this submission now picks up is the outworking of that, which is the 13.2 in that first column. The second column I've already touched on. External factors have clearly varied quite significantly. I know we're all facing that as a challenge, both as individuals and in our businesses. For AEMO, for example, I think we were forecasting interest rates of, certainly we were forecasting inflation of around 2%, somewhere in the Reserve Bank target range back in 2021. And of course, we haven't been anywhere near that for a little while. So those sort of things have exceeded our assumptions that went into that forecast. Financing costs is a key component when we're doing these big capital programs, and it's an area AEMO has been trying to really leverage what is a good, we're a good finance risk, I guess, as an organisation that's got a regulatory entitlement to recover its costs. That gives us, if you like, a good credit rating. And we've been trying to leverage that to actually get lower cost credit for WEM and for all of our activities. And to do that late last year, actually, we did our first bond launch for AEMO, which has allowed us to access some lower cost debt moving forward. So one example of the things that we're trying to do to really get the lowest costs that we can in how we run the business. But those pressures are contributing another sort of 7.6 million to our operating expenditure. The additional internal requirements, so like every business, right, we need to invest in our business. And a couple of key areas here are cyber. We're all facing this escalating threat landscape in cyber. As we all know, the security of critical infrastructure legislation is now in place, and clearly the electricity sector is caught up in that. And so there's additional cyber effort required. And some investments in the business there, and also some of our enterprise systems, so the corporate systems that run our business. These all have a life of their own as well. Some of the corporate systems we're running, actually, we've inherited from Vencorp as one of the founding partners of AEMO back in 2009. Obviously, well out of date, struggling to meet the needs of a modern business. So we're refreshing those, not all at once, of course, but there is a component of that that's in here as well. And I think the reflection I have there is that if we needed to do this as a standalone WA, it would inevitably have cost more than the share that we will end up picking up as part of a broader organisation. So while there are unfortunately costs that we need to incur, hopefully we're getting the benefits of leveraging that national organisation to minimise the impact over here. And finally, the one that I will spend a fair bit of time on in the next couple of slides actually is the new reform and energy transformation activities, because clearly that makes up the lion's share, and particularly all of the capital expenditure that we need to ask for that was not part of that original allowable revenue submission, or indeed the second in-period submission, the first in-period submission. And we had been, I guess, foreshadowing the need for this, but it's really kind of crystallised now in this submission. As I've sort of noted in the sidebars there, the largest contributor is the new reform activities. So and I've got a slide on the kind of key elements of that. But as we've moved beyond the sort of foundation regulatory frameworks that was our WEM reform program to get to the new market on 1 October, obviously our rulemaker and Energy Policy WA has been cracking on with a number of really important reviews, which are now heading towards the implementation stage. So that's a key component. And I think the other kind of key component, which is smaller, but I think really important to call out, is that we had actually expected, or at least forecast in our allowable revenue submission back in 2021, that the resources required to run the business, to operate the Swiss and the WEM and do our planning functions would actually decline once we got past the sort of hump of WEM reform. As it's turned out, actually, we're finding we need to really maintain at kind of the level we've been at for the last couple of years, if you ignore kind of the additional capital resources that came in to do that big digital project in WEM reform. But really our operational kind of baseline is maintaining at a similar level, and there's a lot of things kind of contributing to that, which I'll step through kind of some of those key drivers in a little bit. All right, so I said reform is a very key contributor to this, and this is just a summary, kind of one of our snapshots, I think, of the reform programs that are on our plans at the moment, noting, of course, that the precise timing and scale of these, in many cases, is still being worked through the rule and review processes, and the timeframes are indicative. So, it's hard to be too precise about some of these. Those that are more advanced, we can obviously be a little bit more confident in. But as you can see there, some really key drivers in that. The RCM review is a big piece of work for us, implementing a new flexible capacity product and changing a whole lot of other related things, including some planning, is a big review, a really important one. I think when I look at things like the RCM review and the WEM investment certainty review, of in fact all of these to some extent, but probably particularly those two, really about sending the investment signals that we need for the clean and firm generation to run a decarbonising power system into the future. They're absolutely essential reforms, and we're progressing to support Energy Policy WA and implement those as quickly as possible. But they do come with a bit of a cost, so sort of called out the indicative costs there, just to give you a sense of the scale of these. Now, these don't all hit, of course, in the AR6 period, so not all of these costs appear in the submission, but it just sort of give you a bit of a sense. And as you go down, the scale of them changes. So to enable the aggregator participation is another key reform that we'll be progressing. There's the WEM investment certainty review I mentioned. Another substantial one from a cost perspective is what we've sort of reframed this in terms of how we describe our project into a metering upgrade and cost allocation review in the first instance, but also enabling 5-minute settlements through that as well. So the biggest component of that is actually a metering upgrade, which is essential for a number of different reforms, including cost allocation and 5-minute settlements, probably also DER participation, and some elements potentially of the work happening around the RCM and investment certainty stuff, noting that's still in the works. So that's a really important foundational piece for us that will enable those other reforms to be implemented as they come through. And so while we know, I think the timeline for 5MS is creeping up on us, and we've been chatting to Energy Policy WA about the sequencing and priority of these so that we can really try and have a fairly sustainable level of change going on in our market over time. We're obviously constrained with our SMEs. I'm sure our participants are as well, constrained in how much kind of change you can accommodate in a particular period of time, and we'd like to kind of make that as sustainable as we can. So we're having those conversations, which I believe will be part of a sector-wide discussion in due course. So we might see some things shuffle around there, but the metering upgrade component's actually essential kind of for other things that come off the back of it as well. And then as you go through, there's other buckets that we've grouped some things into with a sense of the sort of scale of those as we currently see them. And I think the other thing, kind of as clear as night follows day, is that while this is our current reforms on the books, there will need to be further changes. We're in the midst of one of the world's most rapid energy transitions. We've still got a lot to learn about how we maintain a secure, reliable, affordable and increasingly low emissions power system through that transition. And I'm sure that once we finish these, there will be a whole bunch of other things that need to be worked through. So we're really setting ourselves up as best we can for continued reform at hopefully an efficient and sustainable level. One thing that makes these submissions really challenging, and I appreciate challenging for you guys to assess whether we're being reasonable and efficient with our prices, is the level of certainty we have about the changes varies depending on where they're at, obviously in the regulatory process, and how far through our planning processes we are by the time we need to make one of these submissions. And within the group of reforms that we're seeking funding for in this submission, we have a number, we have essentially the DER aggregation one is the one we've got the highest confidence in, and we can essentially meet the requirements of the ERA guidelines. As we step through the others, we've got a little less confidence progressively in the scale and scope of them from an implementation perspective and a cost estimate perspective. So we acknowledge that it's been a challenge for us, and I know in turn that becomes a challenge for stakeholders in reviewing this, and the ERA, of course, in making its decision under the rules. So we're kind of acknowledging that uncertainty. We welcome any feedback on how we might best manage that uncertainty, recognising that we are going to need to crack on with these reforms in a pretty timely way. So that's a bit of a challenge as well with these processes. I'm going to go through all the slides before I come back to the questions. Sort of touched on some of these, but I thought I'd just put the figures and the waterfall up. This is the operating side of the equation. So reform activities have both an OPEX component and a CAPEX component. The other areas are essentially OPEX. One thing I'll note actually is that accounting standards have been changing, including in how we treat software as a service in terms of whether that's an asset that can be capitalised or an operating expense. And more these things are falling into operating expenses, as are early planning and feasibility works. So we're also seeing a bit of movement in the classification of some of these costs, which, historically we probably have capitalised more, but the way that the accounting standards are now moving, we're actually needing to expense in the year, so through OPEX, more of these costs, which obviously impacts the timing with which they hit market fees. So that's sort of an underlying trend, if you like, in the shift of costs between buckets that we're also seeing impact in this submission as well. And also why those reform activities have a reasonably high OPEX component to them, higher than they may have historically. So just sort of context, I think, there. But this sort of steps through, as you can see, the scale of each of those. The last thing I wanted to talk to, as I mentioned, reform's a key component of those sort of new activities driven by the energy transition. But of course, there's other things that AEMO needs to do in our operations and our planning, which are also sort of new and expanded kind of components of our core roles. And I think this is not intended to be comprehensive, but I think illustrative of the sort of the key areas, I think, where we're seeing our activities increasing and some new activities being required. And it's really driven by the energy transition. So the growth in demand, which Paul was talking about earlier when we were looking at the challenges of this summer, as well as the changing nature of the power system with the transition away from thermal plant towards more renewables and supporting technologies like energy storage. And so we are seeing some measurable and meaningful changes actually in the activities that we need to do as a result of this, which I've listed there, and I won't go through all of them in detail. But clearly we've been doing some things that we either have never done before or haven't done for a long time with our NCAS and SRC processes. We are seeing growth in facility and participant numbers. That's only going to continue. When we look at our ESU forecast from 2023, we need about 4 gigawatts of new certified reserve capacity installed over the decade. Some of that's underway through NCASs and normal certification processes already, but there's still, several gigawatts there to be installed. So you can see that sort of activity of registering and certifying and facilities and participants is going to be sustained and indeed probably increase. As I won't go through all of those, but probably the other one I'd touch on really is obviously we're seeing more and more demand met from renewables. That's what we need for the energy transition, but of course it also challenges us in an operational sense. We've built the machine that is the power system to operate with thermal spinning masses, and more that won't be the case. We've already seen periods, fortunately few and brief to date, but only going to increase, where to maintain sufficient thermal plant on the grid so that we can respond to contingencies and ramp up when the sun starts going down, we're actually having to curtail small amounts of renewables now on those very low demand days or very low operational demand days. And obviously that's not a desirable outcome. We want to get as many of those clean, zero marginal cost electrons through to customers. And so we've got a bit of work to do to understand the engineering challenge that's inherent in all of that. And I have mentioned before, and we're quite advanced in the development of it now, a roadmap to renewables here for the Swiss, which I've put engineering because that's the nature of it. It's how do we solve those engineering challenges in order to operate the grid of the future. So increasingly, we're needing to build capability into those future-focused areas. And when you see the submission, there's a bit of a discussion about how our operating model, our structure and the way that we work has adapted to really try and set us up for this future, which we've been trying to kind of organise ourselves to simplify work where we can, to make sure that we've got the right people in the right places and the right blend of skills and experience that we need through this phase of the energy transition. And finally, what does this mean for your fees, which is unfortunately a fairly significant increase, about 40 cents of which is attributable just to this in-period submission. Subject, of course, to what the ERA ultimately approves, the intent would be to adjust our fees to incorporate the impact of this submission for the next financial year. And that's always been our practice to do that. In fact, I think the rules probably require it. As you can see on the side, this is just about the WEM. There's no adjustment requested for our gas services information. And I think the points there say it as well as I probably can. Like, we acknowledge this is a really big increase in market fees. And while it might, it's true to say this is a pressure being experienced by market and system operators around the world, appreciate it doesn't make it any easier for our fee payers. So I did really just want to acknowledge that. I think the other thing that certainly is my expectation, and we're really trying to set ourselves up for, is a sort of less of a step change in the future. So my sense, and of course something quite unexpected could hit us from left field, but my sense is now we're sort of at a scale which should take us through the next years of the energy transition, and we shouldn't need to see a big adjustment in our market fees. In fact, I would hope as some of the chunky depreciation from the WEM reform program starts to roll through, we'll actually see some downward pressure on our fees. Now, I'm not going to be as bold as to promise they're going to go down as much as that is my hope, but certainly the upward pressure is absolutely diminishing based on what we can see today. So hopefully we don't need to come back to you with these sort of numbers again in the future. I think that's the end of me. Thank you. Stop controlling the slides. And what have we got in the comments? I'll have a go and see what I can do. Sorry, I'm just trying to work out where I got up to. When's the flexible capacity market expected to be implemented? Martin, do you want to do that one for me? Because I feel like you'll have the date closer to hand than I do.
It's okay. The Nitika actually just jumped in the chat for me on that one. So we're still working through the rules on that one to determine a date and when that will commence. And as soon as we have that, we'll be obviously discussing that with F1, and then we'll also communicate that with the industry. We're very keen to make sure that when we propose a date for enacting market rules, it's an achievable date, and it's not something that we're sort of just making up. So we're going through quite a extensive process to make sure that we fully understand the nature of the changes. The changes to the reserve capacity mechanism in terms of the systems actually are quite complex. So we're just working through that at the moment.
Thanks, Martin.
It's okay, Liz. I didn't miss your question. So while I was talking, I'll jump in there as well. Look, there is a patch coming to fix the pulse dash on the dashboard, and we certainly understand that's been we've gotten quite a lot of feedback about how important that is to market participants. So unfortunately, it's not coming in the weeks. I think it's probably more like in a month or two is my understanding, but I'll get back to you, or I'll get someone to get back to you on a more firmer date once we have that. But we certainly appreciate that that's something that's been asked for multiple times, and we are looking at that with some focus.
Thanks, Martin. I can see a question from Wayne, so I covered the fee adjustment in that last slide, but how does that compare to the NEM? That's a really great question. I don't actually have the NEM fees handy, but what I can absolutely say is that the NEM fees per megawatt hour are lower, and indeed in most liberalised electricity markets they are, because unfortunately we are probably the smallest liberalised electricity market in the world, but yet a lot of the costs that we incur are fixed. So on a per megawatt hour basis, our fees do tend to be higher than the NEM, absolutely, and most other markets. I'm optimistic as the market grows in the way that the Swiss demand assessment and the ESU are now forecasting that we will have more load to spread this cost over, which will reduce the impact on individual participants over time. But of course, we're not there yet. But that's where we're heading. Where are we up to, Martin? Oscar's question, I think.
Yeah.
So DER, yeah, okay. Let me have a crack, and Martin, you can build on it when I run out of the specifics. The DER aggregator investment comes from comes from the government's reform agenda. So in particular, of course, the DER roadmap has always been heading towards DER aggregation, providing network services and market services. And Project Symphony was an important testbed to work out kind of how that would work, what the benefit of it was, and sort of foreshadow the design of the future. Project Symphony's just wrapped up, not far away from publishing final reports, which includes a cost-benefit assessment, which indicates there is potentially quite high benefit to doing this. So that's kind of progressing. But the other part of the puzzle, which is quite important, is the legislative and regulatory framework to do this. And you may have caught that just last week, the electricity industry DER bill passed. One of the things that bill does, or that bill does a few really important things for the future evolution of our market. We've obviously got a new state electricity objective in that, which includes emissions now in a more NEM-like, secure, reliable, affordable and low emissions in the long-term interest of electricity consumers type of objective. It also provides heads of power actually for effectively the orchestration of DER. At the moment, our regulatory framework, or previously, it didn't have an ability to really regulate for the distribution customer relationship, which is a really important component of aggregating DER. And I'm probably stealing Brad and Aidan's thunder a little bit here. But so that now has been incorporated in the heads of power in that bill, which has recently passed. So the foundations are being laid for that to now be part of our future, kind of consistent with the DER roadmap. And the metering upgrade component, really good question. So we had always sort of included this in the spend that we thought we would need to do for 5MS, because that was kind of the trigger that related to it. But actually, as I mentioned earlier, now there's a few triggers for doing it. Just to lay why we need to do a metering database upgrade. At the moment, AEMO's metering system cannot accommodate interval meter data from Western Power. So we get a very small number to deal with contestable customers, but we're not able to take the mass market data. Now, Western Power is well through its AMI rollout, which should be concluded around 2027. And so there's sort of a bit of a burning platform for us to be able to actually take that data and actually improve the accuracy of our settlement. It will affect the notional wholesale meter to a degree. So there's a sort of a need there, but equally we need to be able to get that interval meter data at the more granular level in order to do some of the future settlements that are coming through these reforms. So that's why it's a bit of a foundation piece for not just 5MS, which it was always a foundation piece for, but actually other bits of work. And what we're finding actually is that metering upgrade is probably the biggest component of AEMO's costs in doing these reforms. The actual market design changes that need to bolt onto the back of it a much smaller order of magnitude, although not kind of insignificant when you do tally them all up. But the metering database is a pretty chunky part of it for us. Hope that helps. Did someone, Martin, did you reply to the Liz question?
Yep, I've closed that one off.
You closed that one, thank you. And I think that might be the end of them, unless I've missed anything.
No, I think you got them all, Kate. So it's fine. The only other thing I'd add on the metering upgrade, what Kate outlined is absolutely correct. The larger component of that is associated with how the IT uplift to handle the enormous increase in data. So that's actually quite a complex technical job. A lot of our systems are based and tuned to a low volume of data, so that's why it's a fairly complex piece of job, that bit. The new market, or the market we operate now, has got a lot of the functionality to support 5 minutes built into it, and that's why that component's much more easy to implement, because effectively a lot of the settlements changes are sort of in there anyway. It's a very different project to the one that went through in the NEM, because I know that's often referenced quite considerably. It is a different type of project than the NEM one, just so everybody's aware of that. When we get through it a bit further, and also assuming goes through the regulatory approval, we'll certainly keep this forum updated in what we're doing in that project, because it is it is a major spin for us.
Thanks, and Martin. We've also got just a follow up on this, whether we expect big changes to the notional wholesale meter settlement. I mean, my instinct is it shouldn't be large. It's one of those ones we don't quite know, because there's a lot being bundled up at the moment, and there's other reforms potentially thinking about that as well. So there's probably not a straight answer. But Martin, do you have anything to build on there?
No. I think there's a general view that to get a more efficient market, we need to deal with a wholesale meter. It is an aggregation that's then applied. Getting all the interval data will have more fairer cost representation. So look, I think it's something that everybody really wants to happen. Just have to see how that goes through. There'll always be a little bit of a notional meter, because there's a lot of that will never be 100% gone, but to remove that footprint is very important for the efficiency of the market. All right, I think that's the last of the questions. Okay, so we're going through our final review of our Imperial submission, and once that's released, we'll be obviously giving that to the ERA. Then as soon after that, it gets published on our website, so it's public information. We'll have consultation through the process of it. We're quite welcome to one-on-one discussions about what's contained in the submission. If anybody wants to understand certain nuances of what we're requesting, I'm more than happy to take those on board and have that discussion. All right, okay, so now we'll just move on to the next agenda item. So we have Nitika Kapani, who's the manager for capacity market investment. She's going to give an update on what's happening in that area. Yeah, there's certainly been some very important developments in that space. So over to yourself, Nitika.
Thanks, Martin. Good morning, everyone. As you would have noticed, the team name has now changed. We are no longer the reserve capacity team. So just a brief update to that. We've had a team refresh. We're now called WA Capacity Market Investment. This has been a result of us inheriting the non-co-optimized essential system services procurement process as well. So basically all things procurement, all things to do with procurement in the capacity space is what this team's going to be taking on board moving forward. Quite a few procurement processes that have either been wrapping up or are underway or commencing soon. So I'll kick off with the one that's just wrapping up, which is a supplementary capacity process for the 23-24 capacity year. That concludes on the 1st of April 2024, and AEMO has procured 160 megawatts of the 326 megawatts of SRC for that hot season. We have activated SRC 13 times thus far, 4 times in January and the remainder in Feb. And what are the chances of SRC being activated between now and 1st of April is probably anybody's guess. Milder temperatures for the rest of the month, but one can never tell. Anyways, there is a breakdown of the SRC contracts that I have put in this table. And as you can see, majority of the SRC was procured from load reduction services, and the contracts range from 1.5 megawatts to 60 megawatts. We will be publishing the supplementary capacity contract details as required under the rules as soon as practicable post 1st of April, when the process concludes formally. On a related note, AEMO has also released an updated SRC WEM procedure for external consultation, which closes on the 19th of March. And this amended procedure essentially clarifies the role of Western Power in supporting AEMO to measure the performance of supplementary capacity services that have been activated in accordance with an SRC contract, and also timelines for the provision of this information and assistance. Another important update that has been made to the procedure is the payment in relation to an SRC contract and the determination of that to be made to someone other than a market participant. It also documents the process and information requirements for those intending to respond to a call for EOI for SRC or intending to provide SRC in response to that call for tender or via direct negotiation. If you can move to the next slide, Laura, please, and thank you for driving this for me. So the call for the second procurement process that's underway is the non-co-optimized essential system services, NCAS for reliability services, which was released last year for up to 436 megawatts for the 25-27 period. The call for submissions closed on the 24th of January. AEMO has undertaken due diligence in assessing the submissions received, and we are moving as quickly as possible to finalize the selection of submissions. Successful respondents will be notified by the end of the week, that's 8th of March. In parallel to this process, the expressions of interest process for the 24 reserve capacity cycle is underway. The EOI window closed on the 1st of March. And the next steps will include collating the EOIs received and publishing an EOI summary by the 2nd of April. For those who submitted an EOI, AEMO will assign an indicative facility class and an indicative facility technology type to your respective facilities by the 15th of April. Now, I know that the rules changed this year, where now the EOI is no longer a mandatory process. So I do want to emphasize that while that is the case, for participants who are intending to bring on new capacity in the RCM for the 26-27 capacity year, if you did not submit an EOI, it is a requirement to apply for an indicative facility class and an indicative facility technology type assessment to be eligible to submit a CRC application for 26-27. So all new capacity must have these assessments carried out by AEMO in a timely manner so as to be eligible to apply for the CRC, the window for which is opening on the 15th of April. Now, please note the deadline of the submission of the assessments for IFC and IFTT is the 17th of May. Just to make it easy, I have actually captured a table with key dates, depending upon whether you are a registered participant, whether you are not, whether you have submitted an EOI or not. But those are some of the key dates related to the CRC process that you may want to keep in mind. If you need any clarifications, please note that the team is there to assist you. Get in touch with us in relation to those dates, but I would really encourage you to apply for the IFC and the IFTT status as quickly as possible for any new capacity that you have not offered as part of the EOI process. So those are the two other processes, and we are undertaking a few other processes on the side. A reserve capacity security exchanges are in progress. We're engaging quite a bit with stakeholders around the upcoming 24 certified reserve capacity process. Please note that we are planning on hosting our annual CRC workshop, but in addition to that, the idea is also to host a network access quantity workshop sometime in April or May. The dates are yet to be finalized. We're reaccrediting independent experts to assess relevant level for the CRC determinations. And last but not the least, we are currently undergoing the 23-24 summer reserve capacity testing process. The self-test period concluded on the 31st of Jan, and facilities who did not pass by observation are now going to be subjected to a formal test. It is important to note that this is the first reserve capacity testing period since 1st of October 2023, where participants are being subject to formal test. And AEMO is currently updating its procedures to clarify the change in the notification process to participants when conducting these formal tests. So that will be also captured in the updated WAEM procedure for RC testing shortly. That is my update. I haven't seen any questions come through, but I'm open to any questions anyone has.
Looks like you got off lightly today, Nitika. No questions. All right, okay. Well, thank you for that overview, Nitika. Certainly reach out to Nitika if you've got any questions in relation to that part of the presentation. Okay. Right, so we move on to Q&A and other business. So this is any questions. I can see Liz has asked a question. What's happening with the national CIS as it applies to WA? That's probably more of a question for Energy Policy WA at this stage. So sorry, Liz, I'll have to just sidestep that one. All right, any other questions? Are there any questions that we missed during the forum that we need to rehash as well? There were quite a lot of questions today. Quite happy if you want to take yourself off mute and ask any questions as well. But if not, I will wrap up the forum. Okay, so okay, this doesn't seem any other questions. So okay, I'll move on. So there's a few other forums and publications coming up. So we have the AEMO Procedure Change Working Group. That's on today. We have also an update on the Literacy Statement of Opportunities Forecasting Reference Group. That's always a very interesting discussion as well. 12th of March. Certified Reserve Capacity Workshops and Network Access Quantity Workshops occurring in April. And then we have the WA 2024 Literacy Statement of Opportunities due in June. So that's also coming out as well. So as always, we really appreciate people's questions and input and suggestions on how to improve these forums. It's certainly great to see so many people on here. I think we had almost 100 people at one point. So I certainly hope that people find the forum of value. And with that, I'll close it off and I wish you all a fantastic rest of your day.
Thanks, Martin.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.